do want to start promptly, but we've still only got half the people, so maybe we'll wait another minute or so.
Yeah, is that okay with everybody if we give it until maybe just before 5 past?
Oh, I don't know, I've got so much to talk to Jill.
I know.
Come on.
I had a couple of people say that they'll be joining in late, so I'm sure they won't mind if they just miss the very beginning.
Yes.
Okay, so shall I share what we've got on the poll so far? We've got,
yeah.
So the question is, what do you believe to be the state of ED&I in your company? And the first one is highly inclusive. We have 36% it's true, 29% not true, 39% unsure. Gender equality is a priority, 59% true. This is good news. Not true, 21, unsure, 20. Minorities promote minorities. We're at 40% true, 16 not true, and 42% unsure. And lastly, we operate in diverse teams, 54% true, 29% not true, and 17% unsure. So that's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a little bit better than I was expecting.
Yeah, that's good. Good to see.
For those of you who have just joined, I don't know if this is all in order, but Katerina, Annette, Ganymede, I think you've just logged in. So hello, if you've not been here for ages. And Hamish, hi. Is the poll showing up on everybody's screens?
Yes.
Okay, fab. Well, if you guys want to pop your answers in, I think, Kerrie and Nikki, what do you think? Are you ready to get started in the next minute or so?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've got the link to Jill's book, which I'm going to post into the chat in a little while when everybody's joined, so that everyone can see it.
Okay, excellent. Well, I will kick things off. I will let Kerrie, Nikki, Jill, and Zora introduce themselves properly. I think a few of you will already know me. I'm Magella. I work at Goodman Masson as a consultant into charities. Hi, whoever that was, hello. And we're going to record the session I did mention in the email, but just in case anybody would rather not have their video on, it would be lovely to see you all, but we will be recording it for a couple of people who couldn't come. So I think we've got as many people who've joined so far to do the poll. Please keep doing it if you haven't already. This webinar will be led by Nikki and Kerrie. We've got Jill, who's going to be interviewed a bit later on, as well as Zora and I answering a few questions. And we'll finish up the main part at 6 or just after 6, but as always, we will stick around for another hour afterwards if anybody had more questions they wanted to go through, or just wanted to stick around for a glass of wine or a non-alcoholic drink as well. So I will hand over to Kerrie, and I will let you get going whilst we have a few more people joining.
Great, Magella, thank you very, very much. And thank you to Goodman Masson for hosting today's webinar. This is the third in what's becoming a bit of a series of some hot topics. And I have very proud to say that today's webinar, we've been oversubscribed. And I think it's because of the fact that the topic is a hot, not just because the fact that it was Black History Month here in the UK last month, but just generally I'm getting the feel that people are starting to really talk about the real issues that we still face with ED and I. So we've decided to ditch the slides actually for this particular webinar, and hopefully for forever and a day, because it's so much easier to concentrate on what we're talking about rather than reading what's on a slide. So the agenda, very briefly, is I'm going to welcome Gill Whitty-Collins in just a second, author of Why Men Win at Work, which has just been a groundbreaking book for me to read, and we're going to explore that with her. And then we're going to do the onion exercise, which I'll explain when the time comes. The results from the onion exercise are going to feed into the Q&A with Gill, Majella and Zohra at the end. And after the onion, we are going to talk to Majella and Zohra about their diversity experiences. And then we will go into the Q&A, which is going to be facilitated by my wonderful colleague here, Nikki Deason, who is part of our very small elite group of executive mentors here at Sinclair Dorman, which actually I want to welcome Gill to as well. It's a huge honour. So I think I'm going to go straight into my Q&A with Gill. Is that okay if we do other introductions as the webinar rolls along? I think that's probably the way to go. Nikki, give me a nod if you're happy with that. Yeah, great. So this webinar comes with a little bit of a warning, and that is that we are embracing brutal honesty. So we're not dancing around these issues anymore. This is about asking those bold and curious questions that mentoring provides. And the theme is mentoring impacts ED&I in the workplace. And this webinar is about how. And we're going to explore that first with Gill. Can I please ask everyone to put themselves on mute? Thank you. Gill, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My God, what an amazing book. I'm going to bring it up again. Ta-da! Why Men Win at Work. It's been such an amazing book for me to read, but I just wanted to say that it's not just amazing because of the punchy topic. It's amazing because of the amount of research that you have put into it that really proves the point. And I just wanted to ask you, my first question is, how long did it take to write? And was it a bit like opening up Pandora's box once you got into it?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, it really was like Pandora's box, actually. You know, once I saw the issue, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that and how that came about, and I became quite fascinated by it, and I started to explore it and read stuff, and it really was just like, wow, realizing that the issue is everywhere. It affects women everywhere, every company, every organization, every country, every culture. And what I was really interested in, obviously I felt the need to really prove the point in case anyone doubts it. And some people do, by the way, that it is still an issue. Some people claim it's not really an issue anymore. It's not the biggest issue we've got. So it was very important to me to be very thorough and share all the research to prove that it is an issue, and to prove, you know, absolutely why we all benefit by changing that. But also what I was really interested in was why, because I do feel that in order to solve a problem, you've really got to understand why it happens first. So that's where it became very onion peeling. I know we're going to do some onioning later. When you really start to get into why is this happening, and it goes back to things that are with us since the beginning of time in society. It goes back to things that happen in our childhood, at school, lots of invisible, unconscious, very deep things that we're not even aware of. So yeah, trying to pull all that together was very much like diving into Pandora's box and wondering if you were ever going to come out.
Yeah, I can imagine, because the amount of approaches and slants. And actually, there is a chapter on the science of it, which I found absolutely fascinating. So before we go into all the wonderful topics, was there an aha moment for you that you thought, right, I have to write this book? And what was it?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think it took me far too long to have the aha moment, but there you go. That's the nature of aha moments, isn't it? You don't really choose them. I would say I was very lucky for a very long time, touching wood. I always touch wood when I say lucky. I was, you know, I was brought up comprehensive mixed school, very, you know, feminist parents, very much believed in equality, one of 3 sisters, went to a company that is very well intended on this. And I was in a very balanced culture for a very long time. I would say up until director level, I was in a pretty close to 50-50 male-female culture. I never had a sense of any culture dominating, of any real, if anyone was dominating meetings, it was the women and it was me, for a very long time. And honestly, it did not occur to me, it just didn't occur to me for many, many years to even question whether or not I was equal to a boy or a man. And then absolutely it hit me, and it really, for me, hit me at the senior vice president level. And that was, I would say, I mean, I was in my early 40s. I think that was I know that was the first time in my life, in my career and in my life, that I ever found myself in a male dominant culture. And it was the first time I looked around and saw in meetings and saw, whoa, there are a lot of men in here. There are not many women in here. And at first it didn't bother me because I had no reason to be bothered. Okay, there are a lot of men in here, so what? You know, doesn't make any difference. And then I started to see the dynamics, and I became really fascinated by that. I definitely had that moment of, hold on a minute, the things that I've always done, I've always said, don't work the same way. They don't have the same impact in this culture, in this environment. And I could see the other women having that same experience. And that was when I really started to read about it, devoured books and articles, and, you know, started to realize the extent of it. Absolutely wasn't about me, absolutely wasn't about the women around me, was not about my company. It was something that was happening everywhere. And yeah, realized that I wanted to write a different kind of book about it than the ones that I felt I'd read.
Yeah, because you're crystal clear about the fact that this book is not against men in any way, shape or form. As you say, there are as little as 5% of men who actively, consciously go out to stop women winning at work, which leads me on to 2 points actually. Firstly, I was one of those women who thought that really there wasn't a problem, and that if you wanted to break that glass ceiling, then you went out there and you did it. But that's because I was possibly shielded from the corporate way of life. I've come from an entrepreneur background, which possibly didn't really open up the environment to me. But so just to make absolutely sure, I am now a feminist, and I'm proud to be one after having read this book.
Excellent. Success.
Yes. Ta-da. And the other thing that I love is that you call male feminists femanists. Do you pronounce it that way? Femanist.
I pronounce it femanists with an emphasis on the, and I always put it in inverted commas because otherwise people think I can't spell, which is a bit embarrassing if you've written a book about gender equality and you can't spell feminist. But yeah, feminist, yeah.
Feminist,
but you know, to come back to your point about being one of those women, you know, as I say in the book, you know, ashamed to admit I was one of those women for a long time, and I think it's important to say that, because, you know, when you have an epiphany about something and you become evangelical, it's a bit irritating to not acknowledge that you had a blind spot as well. And I absolutely did. And I think what happens with women is, I think if it hasn't affected you, if it hasn't affected us for, you know, a long time into our careers or you know, our life experience, I think if we're honest, and I'm going to be brutally honest here, we may not say it, we may keep it very quiet, but we're secretly thinking in our minds, I don't really see a problem. And I think that if you have the will and you have the strength, you know, you can overcome this and you can make it. And what I realize now is how arrogant that is, and that actually if we are women who feel that, we've just been lucky that we haven't encountered the barriers yet, and we maybe encountered them, but we haven't encountered them at such strength that they've, you know, really threatened to defeat us or to make us want to just give up and take another path. And I think we just need to, you know, brilliant, you know, the further you can go without them, fantastic. But just having that humility to say, just because it hasn't got me yet doesn't mean it won't. And it absolutely doesn't mean that I should negate or deny it. When other women are telling me it's affecting them, I need to listen to that and say, okay, because I can promise everyone, you know, if you do progress further and further into your career, it'll get you in the end.
Yeah, which you prove in your book with all the case studies and the statistics and the constant research. It's really mind-boggling. So tell me, Gill, when you come across a man at work who firmly believes that he's a femanist, but actually the truth is that he's not really, how would you approach that?
So, you know, in my experience, very few, prior to reading the book, I have to say I've got more coming out as feminists after, but in general, my experience is men are very reluctant to describe themselves as feminist or associate with it in any way. They run for the hills in any discussions and do have, you know, what I call in the book feminist phobia. I think that there's a fear of it. I think you know, feminism has taken on a lot of baggage, a lot of unnecessary baggage over the years. It has nothing to do with feminism, actually. Feminism is really just about equal rights. It's just about us all having, you know, the equal opportunities in this world to do what we want to do at whatever level we want to do it. But there's a lot of baggage that I think has been attached and that men associate with it. So when they hear it, they kind of go, oh no, that's man-hating and I'm not welcome there. And I think that's really unfortunate, and that's why I kind of like the feminist concept, because it's trying to reinvent it a little bit and invite men into that. But to your question, I think even though men may not generally call themselves feminist, I think you're absolutely right that most men absolutely believe that they're not the issue and they're not contributing to the issue. They are not in general sexist, overtly sexist. They're not generally misogynistic. They don't, men do not, I believe, generally wake up in the morning and think, how can I build the patriarchy today and destroy as many female careers as possible? I don't think that's what men do. Most men, virtually no men, are predators. So I think what happens is that a lot of men think, look, I'm not those things. I'm not those bad things. And therefore, I'm not the issue. That's an issue for other men. That's an issue for women to deal with other men. So I think what's important is to try and engage men in this by helping them understand, you know, I know you're good, I know you're decent, I know you're well intended, but you need to know that nonetheless you're completely unintentionally doing things that are holding women back and are therefore resulting in an unequal world, which is bad for everybody. And I think, you know, I would say that, you know, if we could get them, it was so important to me, as you said, that this book's for men as well as for women. Men are holding most of the power, most of the decision making. So we absolutely have to get them engaged in this and embracing this and wanting to be part of the solution. So I worked really, really hard to make men want to read it and to make them stay with it. And I would say if we can get them to read chapter 3, it's called A Few Bad Men. And obviously what it's about is there are only a few bad men and most men are good and decent. But if you count yourself as one of them, you need to know that you're still part of the problem. So please stick with us.
So you talk a lot actually about unconscious bias, which is so true and resonates with me enormously, especially in the mentoring world. We deal with that a lot. And actually, going back to our theme about the fact that mentoring has a positive impact, it really does, because of the fact that it creates the safe environment for barriers to be broken, and barriers are broken by bold and curious questions. And I love the way that you said that really women who have made it have got to open the doors for other women and mentor them, because it's not, the problem doesn't lie just with the men, it does lie with the women who do and have won at work, and making sure that the ladder stays down, unlike Margaret Thatcher, who
did
mentioned
not.
a couple of times, pulled up the ladder behind her, and she
famous for pulling the ladder up. Dear Theresa May, to her credit, did an enormous amount to pull the ladder down and promoted a lot of women. But I do think it's a massive point. You know, we're having an honest chat here. We've all seen it. We've all seen the women who've made it. They're super successful. And, you know, they either pull the ladder up or they shake it so blooming violently that you no way can you hang on to it. And that is, you know, there are a lot of things that I'm asking from men with this book. There are a lot of things I'm saying we need you on board, and there are things we need you to do differently to drive a more equal world. But there are some things that are on women as well, and I think that's absolutely one of them. I mean, the chapter's sisters are not doing it for themselves. I think it's quite self-explanatory what that chapter's about. And I think, you know, what we have to remember is, because of unconscious bias, because of the mini-me syndrome, men are supporting other men. So when men are successful, they pull up other younger men who are like them. So when women make it, which is extremely difficult, they then try and squash down the other women rather than lifting up. We've got a double whammy, because the men are not necessarily pulling us up and the women aren't necessarily pulling us up either. And I think it happens for a lot of reasons. I think it happens for some sad reasons, actually. But I think we as women, we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what, if we get some success, you know, what can we do? What can we do to pull the ladder, to leave the ladder down, put the hand down, help the women up, and just not to be threatened by that. You know, yes, sometimes we're competing in the workplace, but we're not competing with women any more than we're competing with men. So there's really no need for it.
Okay, so I've got so much more to ask you and talk to you about, but already it's 24 minutes past. We've got to get onto our onion exercise. So I just want to leave you with a question about the phrase "a woman in a man's world." What does that mean to you?
You know what? It just makes me livid, that phrase, actually. I just, why do we accept it? You know, why? It is a man's world. It is a man's world, right? Look at anywhere, any walk of life, any business, sport, politics, wherever, 90% plus of the leadership will be men, and sometimes 100%. You know, sometimes there's just not a woman in the room. And we accept it. We accept this man's world. And I find that when you step back, it's incredible, really, isn't it? Women are, they're 50% of the population. We know we have 50% of the intelligence. That there is, you know, I don't think anyone really would challenge the data that women are as intelligent as men, that they're as competent as men. There's an enormous amount of data to say women are as strong leaders as men, stronger in some ways sometimes. And yet we accept that we're less than 10% of the leadership of the world. And so it kind of makes me livid. I think women are actually very, I say, positive, patient and polite about this. And I think that hasn't really worked for us, has it? So I think we need to get a little bit more livid about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Gill, thank you so much. And I've just got to tell everybody again, you've got to get the book, Man or Woman, read it. It's an eye-opener, and it's also it's highly inspirational, just because of the fact that you talk to so many inspirational people, men and women. And I've got to just mention the Super 7%. That was really, you know, mind blowing, and I'm going to take that with me into my working into my working environment. So
that is my favorite chapter too, actually, because it was so inspirational to talk to those women and understand what separates them. Same barriers as we've all had, but they've got some extra special things that I think we can all learn about. And the final thing I'll say before we move on, because I know we need to, I do want everyone to know it's a very constructive book. It's not a moaning book. It explores why this happens, but in the interest of being able to solve it. So the end of it is a massive to-do list chapter. To-do list for everyone: parents, teachers, media makers, businesses, organizations, women and men. It tells you what you need to do if you want to contribute to making inequality history. And that was really important to me, that it's a constructive, action-focused, forward-looking book.
And it is. Thank you, Gill.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're definitely staying with us for the onion exercise, aren't you?
I can't wait for the onion exercise.
Okay, so a little bit of an explanation as to what the onion exercise is. It's a reference towards the fact that we use an onion, and the onions have layers in mentoring and coaching, and really to have an effective mentoring and coaching relationship, you need to peel back the layers of the onion and get to that nub, so that you're comfortable and honest and showing your true self. And I like to bring up Shrek at this point, because Shrek said that ogres are like onions, and Donkey thought that he was talking about the fact that they're smelly, but actually it's because they, underneath their big ugly shells, they're this wonderful people. And that's what we need to get down to by stripping away the layers of the onion. So in this exercise, we're all going to go into Zoom rooms of 3. We're going to talk very honestly about 2 things: the real state of equality, diversity and inclusion in your firm. And the second thing is, I want you to fess up about a conscious bias of yourself that excludes and precludes you from being inclusive. Just one thing. And then if you could put the results of any of the feelings from this exercise into the chat, then we can use them for the Q&A for all 3 ladies when we get to that. Okay, so I'm going to put you all into Zoom rooms now. It's all at random.
And this is for 10 minutes, everyone.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay, so.
Kerrie, will you move everyone back into the main room when the 10 minutes is up?
I will.
Okay,
it'll give everyone a minute's nod.
Great.
Enjoy your rooms. Remember to peel away, get to the nub, be honest. That's what it's all about. See you on the other side. Great. Well, thank you. So on that brilliant note, I'm going to hand over the Q&A to Nikki Deason. I'm sorry that we've gone over. There's just so much to talk about, and 3 just amazing participants. Thank you very much, ladies. And over to you, Nikki.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Magella and Zora, for being so honest and open there. It's really important to hear. So we are now on the Q&A time, and all of us presenters will stay as long as you keep asking questions. And also feel free to email any of us afterwards if something else comes to you. Thank you so much for joining today. We really hope it's been useful and interesting to all of you. And we hope that you can stay a little longer, as I can see that we've already got some great questions. However, recognise that some of you might have to drop off. So I will say goodbye to those of you who are leaving, and try to encourage some of you to stay a little while, because we've got 4 great questions already in the chat. And if anybody has any other questions, please feed them in. So the question at the top of my screen at the moment is, how much would mentoring cost for an individual or an organisation? Kerrie, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the mentoring costs, it completely depends on how many people are going to go onto a mentoring scheme. but really, as support programs for mentoring initiatives can be as low as £25 per person per month. And we do have obviously our brilliant elite executive mentors who offer packages of 3, and then matched depending upon their needs and specific requirements. So which can be so diverse in themselves, from reverse mentoring specifically with D&I in mind, or women's leadership, or whatever. But they're they come in packages, and I can share that with anybody who's interested.
Thank you, Kerrie. And I think this next question might be for Gill, which is, does this conversation acknowledge only 2 genders?
Yeah, I mean, of course not. You know, one of the problems with writing a book like this is you have to generalize, right? I mean, the whole thing is a generalization, and it's one of the things I say in the preface is, to talk about this, you generalize, you talk as if the world is men and women, and of course everything is a lot more complex than that, and we're all on a spectrum, right? And you know, we some of us don't identify with either of that. Some of us, you know, would consider ourselves male, but actually recognize the, you know, generalizations that are being made about women, and the other way around. So, you know, the heading on the book is wherever you work, whatever your gender, this book is for you. And I think that sums it up. It's what I really hope people will do is get beyond the generalization and get beyond the labels, which are, you know, limiting, and actually get into the, you know, the insights and the, you know, oh yeah, that resonates with me, or that not so much. It's one of the just massive booby traps of doing it is, you know, from the start that you're going to make a generalization that somebody's not going to agree with. So it's for everyone.
Thank you, Gill. And while you're there, I'm going to ask you this other question that also relates to your book, which is, it's the female deniers at the same senior level that I often have more difficulty in engaging with and persuading. Any thoughts on how to tackle this?
Yeah, I mean, it's feminist phobia, right? It's feminist phobia, and it's massively present in a lot of women. I talk about this a lot in the book. I've come across a lot of women who will say, I don't know why women talk about this. I don't understand why this is still an issue. And a lot of women do want to actually disassociate themselves from it, and I'll tell you, with good reason in many cases. I talk about this in the book, but when I was at senior vice president level, I was advised by a very senior person to back off the women's stuff because it didn't look good, and it didn't create a good perception of me. It made me look like I was part of the issue. Now, did I back off? Of course I didn't back off, but I think that kind of stuff does put a lot of women off. I think we are often sent messages over the years that keeping our heads down, being one of the boys, not getting involved in all this stuff is going to be better for us. So I think it does happen, and I think we as women just need to say, you know what, we owe it to each other. We are not one of the lads. We are not one of the lads. And if other women are telling us that they're experiencing issues and barriers, I think we owe it to each other not to deny and negate that.
And have you got any specific tips that have worked for you when trying to sort of encourage people in that direction?
When you say people, do you mean the women who are not?
So these senior deniers that are being mentioned in the question, and it was specifically female deniers that are mentioned in the question.
Yeah, I mean, it is a super tricky one. I think we've all experienced it. I think, as in anything in life, nobody likes to be taken on head on in a confrontation in front of everybody. People tend to get defensive and just entrench even more deeply. So, you know, if you're going to try, I'd always try offline, and I'd always try to, you know, appeal to somebody's, you know, hey, their empathy. And I get that this may not be an issue for you, but it's very much an issue for some people. So I think the minimum we can do is not undermine that. But one of the things I also say to women is, I think one of the things that we do, I think we all do it, is we get into that environment and there's another woman there. There's a woman there and she's quite successful. And we naturally think, oh, that woman's going to be my ally. That woman's going to be my friend. She's going to help me. And actually, sometimes she isn't. And we can discuss why, and we can really lament that. You know what? Sometimes if you've tried and it isn't working, maybe your ally isn't the woman who's in denial. Maybe she's deeply, deeply scarred by some things and she just doesn't want to go there and she doesn't want to take on that battle. Maybe your ally's actually one or some of the men. There are some fantastic men out there who get this, who are trying to get this, who really support equality. They see the benefits. They don't necessarily know all the answers, but they actually want to be supportive. Sometimes maybe if you're going down a blind alley with a denying woman, maybe try and see if you can find an ally in the man. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who speaks up and says, I'm with Gill on this. I think this is an issue and I think we should spend time on it. It doesn't really matter what gender that person is, as long as somebody does it.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you, Gill. Okay, I'm wondering if Majella and Zohra maybe can give us their perspectives on this question, which is, so however you've seen it playing out in your organisations, how can we think about all of these different identities that can interact and intersect with gender? So ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability and class. So how can we look at that without being in silos? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
You want to go first, Zora?
I don't think I've got the question quite right. Do you want to just rephrase that?
Yeah. So how do we think about the other identities that intersect with gender to create even more barriers to progression, e.g. ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability and class? So how do we look at those not in silos?
Yeah, I think the fact that all these individuals with some sort of protected characteristics experience some form of discrimination in the workplace. I think that in itself sort of groups them together. I understand that there are individual initiatives needs to be put in place in organization to address each of those categories because each may have different barriers that they're experiencing. So I think in my view, it would be really the individuals taking a proactive approach, and also for the organizations to really consider initiatives that are addressing each type of discrimination that these individuals are facing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think they're definitely, this is Katie's question, isn't it? Yeah, I think, you know, I agree that I think often it's managed in silos. You know, my company, for example, have done an amazing job of putting these internal networks in place, but it's like there's a women's network, a BME network, an LGBT network. And, you know, as much as there is an overarching discussion, I think people do it because it's easier potentially to tackle individual issues in their specific sections, and you know, you directly speak with somebody with a certain protected characteristic and try to understand their worldview and what life has been like for them. I think that Katie, you definitely have a point about acknowledging the overriding concept of privilege. You know, we have to acknowledge the privilege that we have, and I do think that that's the first step in really being able to make change, because Sandy and I in our breakout room, we were being very honest. I think there are probably none of us that can honestly say we've never had some form of bias, conscious or unconscious, about people who, I use the example of when I'm looking at CVs and I see somebody went to the University of Manchester, you know, I immediately am like, oh, I've got something in common with this person, I'd like to have a chat with them. That doesn't mean that I think everybody else that didn't go to the same uni as me is terrible, but you have this inner thing that you kind of get a bit excited about it. And I don't know what the answer is, to be honest, but I think it starts with looking at yourself.
I think that's a really good point, and thank you, because I wasn't sure whether to mention the so in Katie, the second part of your question was about needing to acknowledge the overriding concept of privilege, and I wasn't quite sure whether to raise that as a separate question, but I think, Magella, thank you for bringing that in to the same question. Okay, so I'm looking down now. So somebody has asked whether there are any tips on how to implement reverse mentoring, and I think, Kerrie, that could lead us quite nicely into mentioning our next webinar.
Yeah, I've just replied to her privately, actually, just to say, yes.
So our next webinar, which you will all hear about, sorry, Kerrie, do you want to say it? It's on the 14th of December. Kerrie, do you want to? Sorry. Yeah, it's on this very topic of reverse mentoring. And Karen Bradshaw, who joined us, is on the list today, actually, is going to be speaking at that webinar. And so we will be telling you in the next few days all of the details about that webinar. So I'm now just trying to go down to other questions. So there's one here. How do you or should you handle a difficult female boss who does not support women? Gill, have you got any thoughts on that very challenging situation?
Oh my goodness. You know what? This is where you need your mentors and your sponsors. And I think it's, by the way, this isn't just about, I know it happens, it's a very specific thing. This is not just about having a female boss who doesn't support women. This is about any situation when you find yourself with a boss who isn't supporting you for whatever reason, is biased against you for whatever reason, and towards other people for whatever reason. So it can be the woman thing, the queen bee thing, the competitive thing, which is horrible to be on the end of. I think we've all been on the end of it. But it can be something else. So to me, I think it's a broader point of, you know, I'm quite realistic about this, you know, unless you're an experienced therapist, it's going to be difficult to change that person and change the way that they are. You obviously try to build a relationship. This is where your mentors come in. This is why, you know, in any organization, we all encounter a difficult boss at some point. Nobody goes through life always having an amazing boss who looks after them. We all get bad uns. And that's why you need to not be alone in a culture, in a network, and purely relying on the boss. And this is why it's so important to, you know, work on that relationship currency in an organization, not just on the performance, not just relying on your performance, not just relying on the current boss and them looking after you, but making sure that you're also investing time over the years in having relationships with other people beyond that management line, mentors and sponsors, because sometimes in your career they need to come in and save you. They need to come in and say, okay, this isn't working. This person's amazing. I know this person's brilliant. There's a chemistry problem here. We need to change this. You just got to have those other people. And this is why I always say to women, you know, please don't just think that doing the great job is enough. And, you know, I think so many of us, I always was the same. We think, you know, it's a meritocracy. I'm going to do the job. Everyone's going to see it. That's going to be enough for me. It isn't. Sometimes you need more than that. And you need to also spend some time just making sure you're visible, making sure that you've got a network, and, you know, allocating that time in the day, not just to getting the job done, doing that stuff as well, because at some point you're going to need it.
Thank you, Gill. That's really helpful. Okay, next question. Zora and Majella, thank you for your honesty and sharing your personal experiences. What one thing would you like to see different in UK workplaces to help dismantle systemic racism?
Just one thing.
I'm sure you can say more than one if you'd like.
I think that the first thing that springs to mind of many is that every organization, no matter how small, you need to have somebody in place, whether it is a part-time HR consultant, or if you're a larger organization and can afford to, an ED&I lead, whether it's somebody in the learning development team or a newly created role dedicated to just that. I think every new joiner to that organization needs to have some level of training on the company values, on unconscious bias and affinity bias, and the current state of the diversity within that business, and how they've identified and what is the state that they want to get to. You know, we have been doing, there's loads of stats and statistics that my L&D team have been doing on what the, you know, percentages of people with certain protected characteristics in London is, and how does that compare to our workforce. And they've been very open about it, and we kind of know which areas we're lacking in. And I don't know why that wouldn't just be part of every UK workforce. And if it was, you know, I think it would have helped avoid some of the situations that, you know, I have had, Zora has had, and some of the other people that were messaging me privately as well, you know, I know that you will have had.
Yeah, I think I agree with Majella's point, but just to add on that, I think sometimes, you know, it's easy to tell people that diversity brings, you know, a greater return for organization, you know, very general sort of statements. But I think what would really get people to think is when you quantify that, when you actually put it in a you know, in terms of numbers, what organizations within the industry who have diverse teams across all levels, not just at the junior level, at an entry level, but across all levels, all the way to the top, what their returns are, and, you know, really kind of quantifying that it's the correlation between diversity of the teams and the output, sort of, because I think you know, the end sort of goal for the organization is to have that return, because, you know, that's what they're doing. You know, it's a business, so they need to be able to make a good return out of the investment they make, whether it's through hiring employees, whether it's through services and so forth. But it's really about being able to quantify that, so that the individuals who have reached senior manager roles or even managerial roles, that they truly understand the benefit that this diverse teams brings. And then that way, hopefully they will think, they will be conscious of that unconscious bias, or even the conscious bias that they have, that they see that it will benefit the whole organization, it will benefit them in a way that, you know, their jobs will continue, the organization will develop, the organization will progress, and hopefully be, you know, a leading one within the industry. So I think being able to quantify that, you know, exactly how much will the organization benefit from this, it's difficult. I totally agree that you can't really put a number to it, but doing a comparison between organization, given everything, all the other variables the same, how much would they, you know, what their output level was, and then comparing it to when they've actually tried to make the organization more diverse, what the given those variables fixed, what was the difference. And obviously there's a lot of research that has confirmed this, but it's more like a general sort of thing. So for example, a report that was done by McKinsey, it suggested that if equality for women is promoted within all organizations and society, there will be an increase in the global growth of about 12 trillion dollars, and that is significant. So and I'm sure that many managers are not quite aware of all these numbers. So it's really about putting that out there so people can see the correlation between the two.
Well, I think Jill's got, is it chapter 2 or 3? You've got some really good stats and statistics on exactly this, you know, even down to how more diverse organizations perform better financially and profitability wise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That few bad men chapter is exactly about that. It's about why should, if you're a man and you think you're actually winning from this, and it's like life's all, you know, you're a middle-aged white man, white middle-class man, it all seems rather good for you. There's a lot of data in there to say actually not really, because your business would be performing so much better if you were leveraging diversity. And obviously that's not just female diversity, but all sorts of diversity. You would be performing better. So do you want to win personally and succeed in a business that's, you know, stagnating or not very exciting growth, or do you want to win in a dynamically growing business? So there's a ton of data to prove that it's truly diversity is a growth driver. Absolutely.
Yeah, and as an accountant myself, and I know there are a few other accountants in this call, I think that those chapters are particularly sort of we access those well. So we've also got a comment here. I'm not sure whether you want to comment on the comment. It needs gentle but constant challenge, I feel. Moving to confrontational challenge, in my experience, leads to conflict, and we need to move on from that type of conversation. What are your thoughts on that? Any thoughts from any of you?
I don't think it needs to be quite so gentle, but I'm biased and I'm impatient. I think it's taken long enough to make change for me. So I think constant, absolutely. Aggressive, no, but I would err away from being too gentle about it, because, you know, I think that's another thing about the stereotype of being a woman. You know, there were some statistics, again, you know, Jill, you've got loads of them in your book. I, as a recruiter, have been aware that I think it's something to do with a man will look at a job description. I might have mentioned this on a previous webinar. And if they tick something like 32% of the job description, they will apply for the role. Whereas for women, it has to be a minimum of about 83, or it might have been 81, 82%. So there's a nervousness about putting yourself out there, and nothing will change, I think, if we're too gentle about it. So that would be my thoughts. I'm not disagreeing with you, Chris, but I wouldn't necessarily have the same approach.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions, so I'll move on to another one if that's okay with everyone. Twice in my career, I've experienced the opposite, where they've used their ED to play the victim card when there was no trust in it. How do you deal with that so they're not also used to advantage them because the organization doesn't want it to become an issue? This one's from Nipur. And Nipur, I wonder if you would mind unmuting yourself, because I'm not quite sure I've understood the question. So perhaps you can explain the question.
Yeah, there was also a typo in there saying there was no truth in it. You know, it's basically saying, you know, you can make a case against someone because, you know, I'm ethnic myself, I'm Indian, to say, you know, you can use feminine card or you can use your ethnicity to say you haven't got a job. I mean, it was the other way around, where in my organization, someone was basically saying you're discriminating against me because of so-and-so. And there was just no truth in it because they wanted to be promoted or they wanted to be put forward for something. And the HR was like, we can't argue that, and we would have to put them forward. I was like, they don't have the qualifications that we want for that role, so why would it, just because of their background, that we would put them forward?
So if you don't mind, I just want to jump in really quickly on that. You know, Nipur, I, as we're obviously all aware, I'm a recruiter. So massive parts of my job is getting good, genuine feedback and passing it on to candidates, not, you know, oh, the culture fit wasn't right. We're not allowed to say that anymore. That's not feedback and it's not an answer. I think that is really dangerous territory if somebody does bring up something like that and you would feel, you know, no, there's absolutely no truth in that. Why would you think that? Which is why in the specific instance of them not being right for a job, it's your responsibility as the person quantifying that and as the hiring manager to give constructive, specific and concise reasons, keeping it purely professional as to why they didn't meet the criteria for that specific job, you know. And I think if you can just be very honest and very specific about that, that is all you can ask for. And that would be how I tackle a scenario like that.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. But sometimes it's not just for recruiting, it's for, you know, internal, you know, someone's been promoted, then they didn't perform well, so then you want to not demote them, but put them back to what they were doing, you know, really well.
Yeah.
Again, they're like, no, it's bullying and being racist. You know, it wasn't against me, but a few other managers. And again, it was, you know, you've got all the backup to say, you know, we've got the proof to say you haven't done well or you haven't performed, you know, so and so. But it's just so hard when they then play the victim card.
But it's also important to understand, why do they feel that way? You know, you may not see why they're saying it and think that it is a victim card, but as much as it may look doubtful to you, there might be a reason that they think that, not necessarily because of anything, you know, you or the hiring manager in question has done, but previous experiences that they've had throughout their life. So on the flip side, I also think it's really important that you sit down with that individual and understand, okay, why do you feel this way? You know, you need to hear them out in that scenario, which I'm sure you did. But
no, we did the full investigations, etc.
Yeah.
And showed them all the backups to say this is the reason why, and it's got nothing to do with the background, but it's just the fact that people bring it up.
Yeah.
The one thing I would just chip in, I mean, it's impossible without knowing the specific case and specifically what happened in these examples. But just one thought I would throw in is sometimes these things are extremely deep and complex, and we always need to remember that for people to perform, it's very, very difficult, potentially impossible, to perform in a culture that is not your culture. So, and by that I mean a workplace culture. So, if a culture is dominated by, you know, one type of person, one group of people, and you don't feel like you belong or fit into that culture, or you have to change your behaviour, it's impossible for you to perform at your best in that culture. So sometimes you can have a situation where somebody's been put into a job, given a promotion, whatever, and actually what you're actually seeing is just, oh, they're just not performing, they're just not doing as well as the other people. But actually the things that are causing that are actually can actually sometimes be cultural and because of a lack of diversity in that culture, and that person just not feeling like they're comfortable there, and that they're not relaxed and they just cannot be at their best. So I think it's always worth, you know, being on the alert for that as well.
I appreciate that.
I just wanted to add something to that. I'm not sure if you have time. I'll be quite quick. Just wanted to say, so for example, you know, what Majella touched upon, the giving a feedback. So if feedback, especially if you're dealing with candidates internally within an organization, if there is genuinely no bias or unconscious bias, you know, involved, and the person is not securing promotion because of the fact that they are from a protected, you know, they have a protected characteristic, then at the time of giving a feedback, you should be able, as a hiring manager, to point out how they can. So, for example, they don't have a specific skill. You should be able to point out how they can develop that skill so that within the next year, they're ready for that promotion. But if you don't have an answer, okay, if you don't have an answer, if you don't have to say what skill is it that they're lacking, that they haven't to secure this promotion, And as a hiring manager, which you're a lot more experienced, and you can't really, state what they can do to help them to develop that skill, then that would be quite clear that they're probably not playing the victim card, because they generally want to know. It's not about saying that with every feedback it should turn positive and the job should be handed to the individual in question. But it's about giving them that feedback, that they know what they need to do in order to develop that skill that they don't currently have.
Yeah, agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we've got to the end of the questions now. We've also got down to, so there's 21 participants, including 5 of us, so 16 people that are still with us. So
there is one more question actually that's just popped up.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, there is. Thank you, Majella.
Okay.
Well, Pardeep, would you like to ask that question in person? Is Pardeep still here?
Yeah, he's right below you.
Oh, I can't search. Sorry, Pardeep. For some reason I can't see you. That's very strange. And then perhaps after that we can move into a slightly more informal, because there are a couple of comments as well in the chat that people might want to say. They're not specifically questions. I can see you now, Pardeep. Sorry, I'm being blind.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. It's just, I think it's a bit of a tricky one. So if you have 2 candidates or more candidates for a job, and you just feel that one candidate may be a better fit within your team. So if you're looking at the personalities within your team, existing personalities within your team, and you obviously need everybody to work together and kind of get on. So would it be wrong to kind of hire somebody who may be lesser qualified than one of the other candidates if you think they'll be better fit within the team?
I think it depends. Oh, sorry. Who did I just interrupt?
No. You were first. You go ahead. You go ahead. Then I'll chip in.
Okay. Thank you. I think it depends on what you mean by fit. That can mean so many different things. I think this is where we get into the territory of positive action versus positive discrimination. How many of you would say you kind of know what the difference between those two things are? Because I really didn't before I got training on it earlier this year. No. Okay. So not as an HR expert, positive discrimination is technically not legal, but you should avoid discrimination of any kind, albeit positive. Positive action, for example, would be you are advertising for a job, Pardeep, in your team, and you want to ensure that your job doesn't just go on, charity jobs or education jobs, jobs.ac, whatever it is. And you make sure that you put it on new websites like Diversity UK have a job board, Black Young Professionals Network, the Amos bursary is specifically for young Asian men and women. That would be positive action. I think positive discrimination is potentially what you mentioned in that, genuinely the best person for the job didn't have any protected characteristics, but they were discriminated against because they didn't. I know that sounds counterproductive, and I really didn't kind of get it or agree with it when I received the training, but I think you just have to ensure that everybody is being judged on a level playing field, and then ultimately you do give the best person for the role. That's the person that gets the job. I don't know if you'd agree, Jill. Were you going to say something?
I was leaping in on the F word, the fit word, because
okay.
one of my passionate beliefs is that we should ban the F word, because actually, if you think about fit, it's the opposite of diversity, right? Fit is the opposite of diversity, and don't get me wrong, it's so human. We all want an easy life, right? We think, oh, how lovely, this person fits. This person, we're all going to get along so well, and they just fit into our thinking. And it's the opposite of diversity, though. As soon as you get that comfortable feeling of fit, by definition, you're probably hiring somebody who's kind of like what you've already got and is going to bring a little bit more of the same. And actually, when you start to feel that tension of, oh, this person's a bit different, there might be a bit of aggro there, actually counterintuitively, you should be looking very, very closely at that person and thinking, what can that person bring something that we just don't actually have? There's a really brilliant example that I came across, and I can't remember the details now, but it was basically about a guy who was basically making a hiring decision, and they basically did a test, and they did not hire, so they had one place to fill, and they had, you know, a person who'd scored super, super high on the test. And they had the other person who'd actually not scored super high on the test, but what that person had done is they'd got answers right on the test that the people on the current team had got wrong. So the person they hired filled the gaps in the team. And I just think that's a superb example of being afraid of fit and banning it, and thinking actually different is good, different is diversity. So I just, fit word, just be wary. That would be my thought.
I have a question. Is it time for a glass of wine?
I thought no one would ever ask.
Well, anyway, we've now been joined by everybody else. We were having our breakout room in the main room due to technical reasons, so sorry, we overran a bit there.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I hope lots of feedback and results from that have gone into the chat to feed our Q&A. Lots of feedback and results from that have gone into the chat to